The Case for the Ontology of Money as Credit, Money as Bearer or Basis of Value, by Phil Armstrong and Kalim Siddiqui. The Credit Theory of Money. With respect to the credit theory we focus our attention on the work of Innes and his two famous articles from the Banking Law Journal, What is Money, in 1913, and The Credit Theory of Money in 1914. As we noted earlier, for Innes, the nature of money is founded upon the credit and debt relationship, and money should not be seen as a development of barter. Innes is highly critical of the contention that more efficient direct exchange was facilitated by the use of commodity money. He considers both an apparent mistake made by Adam Smith in this context and its unwanted legacy. He notes that Smith referred to the two most general quoted instances of the use of commodities as money in modern times, namely that of nails in a Scotch village and that of dried cod in Newfoundland, in his 1913. Innes notes that, rather than nails being used as commodity money in Scottish villages, the nails were merely accepted as part payment of debt, which was denominated in the unit of account applying at the time. In the Scotch village, the dealers sold materials and food to the nail markers and bought from them the finished nails, the value of which was charged off against the debt. End quote, in his 1913. Referring to the supposed use of dried cod as commodity money, Innes is equally scathing. Innes then contends that Smith thought he had found commodity money, but had really discovered credit, and highlighted examples of how the law and convention existed at the time had been permitted particular debtors to settle their debt when it was due using specific commodities. However, these commodities were merely permitted signifiers, given a value in terms of the unit of account, pounds, and were not a means of measuring value, or indeed a medium of exchange in the sense of being a circulating medium, which was used to settle debts in general. They were merely accepted at their money value when the uncommon circumstances required it, in his 1913. The supposed use of tobacco as money offers us an interesting example of the relationship between money, or money of account, and money things. Peacock, 2017, notes how tobacco was used as money in colonial Virginia, Maryland, and North Carolina, including payment of purchases and or for paying fines and taxes. Footnote 12. Peacock, 2017, gives a thought-provoking summary and critique of Lawson, 2018, and Lawson's approach to the ontology of money. Ingham, 2018, contributes to the debate with a further critique. End footnote. Indeed, a number of items in addition to tobacco, such as corn, wheat, tallow, leather, and beaver skins, fulfilled monetary functions in North Carolina. Rabushka, 2008. And corn was recognized as legal tender in 1631 by Massachusetts. Sela, 1982. In Virginia, which like Maryland relied on tobacco cultivation for its economic livelihood, tobacco was used in market exchange and payment of taxes. Breen, 1985. By legislative act of 1619, Virginia designated tobacco a means of payment, and value were assigned to quantities of tobacco: 3 shillings per pound of highest grade, 18 pence per pound of low-grade tobacco. Peacock, 2017. Thus, tobacco acquired the legal status of a money thing, or a commodity money, and became acceptable as a means to settle debt. In other words, the holders of such commodities held a credit valued in terms of the unit of account. Rather than being money itself, we would argue that the tobacco and other commodities were merely signifiers of credit. Footnote 13. Peacock, 2017, provides a detailed analysis of the arguments surrounding the status or otherwise of tobacco as money. End footnote. In order to facilitate a critique of the traditional story popularized by Smith, Innes posits a question. Quote, if we assume that in prehistoric ages man lived by barter, what is the development that would naturally have taken place, whereby he grew to his present knowledge of the methods of commerce? End quote. He then looks deeper into the issue, stressing the importance of credit. Quote, there is absolutely no reason for assuming the existence of so clumsy a device as a medium of exchange, when so simple a system as credit would do all that was required. End quote. Innes, 1913. Innes, 1913 contends that, quote, what we have to prove is not a strange general agreement to accept gold and silver, but a general sense of the sanctity of an obligation. In other words, the present theory is based on the antiquity of the law of debt. End quote. He then notes that the historical evidence overwhelmingly supports the credit theory of money, regarding the idea of barter as the origin of money, as without foundation. He concludes across history, in a wide range of locations, debts and credits are equally familiar to all, and the breaking of the pledged word, or the refusal to carry out an obligation, is held equally disgraceful. Innes, 1913. Innes clarifies the meaning of credit. Quote, it is here necessary to explain the primitive and the only true commercial or economic meaning of the word credit. It is simply the correlative of debt. What A owes to B is A's debt to B, and B's credit on A. A is B's debtor, and B is A's creditor. The words credit and debt express a legal relationship between two parties, and they express the same legal relationship seen from two opposite sides. A will speak of this relationship as a debt, while B will speak of it as a credit. End quote. Innes, 1913. He is then able to define money as credit. Quote, credit is the purchasing power so often mentioned in economic works as being one of the principal attributes of money, and credit alone, is money. Innes, 1913. He follows this by explaining the nature of credit. Quote, a first-class credit is the most valuable kind of property. Having no corporeal existence, it has no weight and takes no room. It can easily be transferred, often without any formality whatever. Innes, 1913. He then explains the relationship between credit and debt, and in so doing describes the nature of money. Quote, whether the word credit or debt is used, the thing spoken of is precisely the same in both cases, the one or the other word being used according as the situation is being looked at from the point of view of the creditor or of the debtor. End quote. Innes, 1913. Quote, money then is credit and nothing but credit. A's money is B's debt to him, and when B pays his debt, A's money disappears. This is the whole theory of money. End quote. Innes, 1913. In his second article, Innes defined state money as credit. Quote, every time a coin or certificate is issued, a credit on the public treasury is opened, a public debt incurred. End quote. Innes, 1914. Innes recognized that a debt to the state or tax liability can be paid by the return of the government's own debt instrument. In other words, there exists, quote, the right of the holder of the credit, the creditor, to hand back to the issuer of the debt, the debtor, the latter's acknowledgement or obligation, when the former becomes debtor and the latter creditor." End quote. Innes, 1914. Innes's work is significant inasmuch as it provides a powerful critique of orthodox theory concerning the ontology of money. It highlights the weaknesses in the latter approach and provides a persuasive alternative perspective, namely money as credit in its essential nature. We would argue that it is possible to develop a structure which illustrates the relationship between the credit theory of Innes and the state theory developed by Knapp. Smithen, 2018, contends that the study of money and monetary issues should follow a four-stage schema, beginning with a realist social ontology, followed by economic sociology, monetary macroeconomics, and finally, political economy. Applying this structure allows us to see credit theory as foundational and forming part of the first stage, seeking to explain the ontology of money itself. The state theory applies to the second stratum, the economic sociology, which explains what is acceptable in payment of debt in the specific society in which we live. Footnote 14. Smithen argues that the third stage of monetary macroeconomics deals with the technical issue of explaining the operation of a monetary economy, and that the final stage of political economy deals with questions of policy, governance, and equity. Smithen, 2018. Smithen is critical of the approach of mainstream economics, which stands opposed to his schema, and notes that the advocacy of an individualist ethical position underpins the practice of mainstream economics. Smithen, 2010, contends that, quote, "Most economists, as well as political or social scientists, essentially form their ethical views first. The views then expressed are more likely only implicitly formed on ontology and epistemology, then follow directly from this, and the political stance that emerges is simply that deriving from the original ethical judgment." End quote. Smithen, 2010. Smithen, 2010-2018, rejects this approach and believes that investigation should begin with ontology, which should be followed by epistemology, then ethics, and finally, politics. He argues that this philosophy-informed structure corresponds with his four-stage schema outlined earlier. Smithen, 2018. End footnote.